Welcome back to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. We are honored and delighted to have a master of historical fiction, historical horror, that has their first modern day book that is coming out September 16th called Fiend. Everybody, please welcome Alma Katsu to the show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, we talked a little bit before. We at least both lived in the Washington D.C. area for a while. It's interesting to see, as you have specialized previously in historical horror, just kind of getting your background on your love of horror and your experience with horror in general, and then I want to dive into how sort of your professional and personal life living there kind of brought you to some of the subjects maybe that you've written about. But first off, have you always been a horror fan? Has that always been something you've been interested in?
I'd probably say that I was more a speculative fiction
Okay.
fan. Yeah. I mean, so I know a lot of folks who are in horror, are kind of canonical. They, want to read the same classic books and kind of have a similar view going out in the world. A lot of them are really, really into horror movies. And I can't say that that's me. So I'm a different kind of horror person. But I started out reading speculative fiction very, very young, like Edgar Allan Poe when I was like
Okay.
8. Yeah. And
Light
that made
reading.
an impression on me. And there's, a lot of horror there in Poe too. So, but it just made an impression on me as to, what kinds of stories I like, and then end up shaping what kind of stories that I went on to write.
Yeah. Well, as an aside, we just got a new black little kitten, and his name is Poe, named after Edgar
Yeah,
Allan Poe.
exactly. We'll
Perfect.
have
Yeah.
to put some pictures of him up for you to
Yes.
see. That's really interesting because I think, Rebecca has a very kind of similar thing that she still really isn't a huge fan of horror in the sense of film.
Boogie Woogie Woogie.
Of the
Yeah.
sort of like, monsters, all that kind of stuff. Or like the slasher killer, kind of thing. It's definitely more of the horror as a reflection of society, a
Yes.
reflection of like real things that are going on. And I think that
So your books are like right up my alley. The historical horror, like loved it. And that's it. It's like, the human horrors. I just didn't realize that was horror,
Well, I think that's pretty common today because horror is sort of broadening.
Yeah.
Whereas some people think when they hear the word horror, they think of Saw movies or something
Right.
like that. But I think the horror community itself has really broadened, and that there's room for all these things. But it's funny, I was at a horror event a few months ago, and the questions were all geared towards, what's your favorite Stephen King novel? And when did you first read Lovecraft? And what's, your top 5 horror movies? And I explained to them, for me, it was different growing up. I mean, for one thing, I'm of the age group that for whom Dark Shadows was a first run,
Yes. Awesome.
And so, like a lot of girls, a lot of people, but a lot of girls, it was a soap opera. We ran home after school to watch Dark Shadows. So I really love Gothic stuff. And I've
Yes.
watched a lot of Gothic movies. Again, when I was growing up, it was Hammer Films, on
love
Saturday
the Hammer
afternoons.
films. Yeah.
So I have that, but maybe not some of the other stuff. It's not that I hate slasher or whatever,
Mhm.
but it's just not what I would naturally be drawn to writing.
Right. And it's not like you shy away from,
I'll do a slasher. Yeah.
well, violence or no, I mean, Alma in her books, it's like it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
like it doesn't look at those things and describe them, but I think that definitely, and especially, as before Fiend, you were very much in that historical horror thing. Was it when you go to write a book or, think about your subjects, does the subject come first and then you think, what can I do around that?
Yeah, I was curious about that
Which
too.
comes first, sort of the ideas. Just as background, when I was in 6th grade, we did a whole unit in my library class about westward expansion, and everyone was writing about the gold rush and that kind of stuff. And they were like, look at all these books and you can, do a project on whatever it was. And you probably won't be surprised, picked the Donner Party. And I have been obsessed with the Donner Party ever since. So when I saw that you'd written a book that kind of explores maybe a different side of what may have happened during that, I was obsessed and loved it. And were you interested in the Donner Party first and then thought, okay, what can I write about it? Or was there sort of the folklore and the different things that, scientifically what goes into that, or was it kind of all at once?
Well, it's probably not the story you expected to hear, but I'll tell
I
you.
love it.
So this is well, I mean, I was interested in the Donner Party, years and years and years before I ended up writing The Hunger. As
Hmm.
a matter of fact, in grad school, I did a class on screenwriting, and for my final project, it was sort of a dark, humorous story about dogs eating their owners when they're trapped in the house when the owner
Oh, yeah,
dies, and
yeah,
it referenced the Donner Party as well as the soccer team that got stranded in the
yes.
Andes.
Mhm.
But so, it was always kicking around in the back of my mind, although I'm not particularly drawn to cannibalism.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's the Hunger, as well as the next two historical horror novels, came about a little bit of a different way, and that is that I have partners on those 3 books. But let me explain how this worked. So
Okay.
my agent was approached by this company, and the company really were these 2 women who were both best-selling YA authors, but also were editors at Penguin Books, I think, and got laid off back in Black Friday years ago.
Mm.
So they started their own business because as writers, they found they had a lot more ideas than they could actually execute.
Hmm.
So you probably know this model is book packaging. There are companies called book packagers who come up with ideas and they find writers and they find publishers and they sort of bring them together and sort of are the executive producers in the middle. So that's pretty much what they were doing. But when they approached me, I said, I don't want to do your usual business model. We will be partners in this. I am not a work for hire
Mm.
person.
Mm.
And this was the first adult book they'd ever done. Now, I should say too, the reason I was interested in working with them is because at that time they had a really high rate of sell through for film rights. And I had not sold any film rights on any of my previous books. So I thought, well, maybe this will be one way to sort of break into that. So I agreed to do it. And how it worked was, we would come up with an idea, although they had thought of the Donner Party, when they approached my agent. And then I would do the research and then we would work together to sort of work the outline. And then I would write it. They'd do a pass at editing and we hand it into the publisher. And then I would work with the publisher to get the book edited. Really, the vast majority of the work fell to me.
Mhm.
By the time we got to the fervor, there's almost none of them in that book. It's almost all me because it was, my husband's family were interned, my
Yeah.
mom's Japanese. I just knew all this, and their experience really wasn't informing the story. So, and that was it. I don't work with them anymore, but that's how it started. And, so one thing I should explain is, and you guys know this, is that my background is, I worked for the government
Right.
Mhm.
for a long time. I worked as an intelligence analyst. After that, I went to work for the RAND Corporation. And that line of work, you're used to working for clients and trying to help clients like figure out the best solution, right, to what they're trying to do. And so that's sort of how I approached it. Plus, these 2 women are very good writers themselves. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll learn something from them. Maybe there's something about their process or whatever that'll make me a better writer. And I did learn some things from them, but I also learned that I didn't want to operate like that. So
Hey,
I
that's
stepped away.
it's a good lesson though, honestly. Like sometimes you think like partnering is a good idea and then it shifts and whatnot. It's interesting because when we were talking to you at Books and Brews, you were talking about so many different things now are being offered, into film rights and,
Series.
yes.
Yeah.
And just, I felt like your books feel so cinematic and deep when you're reading them. Like
Oh,
there's
thank you.
you're welcome. There's so many characters, but then at the same time, like I didn't feel like when, like I could think of like the book like Deacon King Kong or the Heaven and Earth grocery store. There's a ton and you're like, whoa, how do I keep you straight? Like I felt like I could keep everyone straight. I felt like I could just relate and there's like it stuck. Well, I'm just going to talk about the hunger right now, but like I could keep everything straight and it was like, okay, this is talking about what happens and you flesh it out, but there's so much more happening in the books too of just like tying into like the accusation of women in witchcraft when, she's just trying to take care of like the, medical needs as they travel westward, and being familiar with plants, being someone that I love gardening. Every time I'm reading through, I'm like, oh yeah, I own that one. I own that one. Oh yeah, we can do,
Yeah.
it's always amazing to me what things pop out. But then I love how you tied in. There's a character that, is kind of exploring their sexuality. You have some scenes that deal with some sexual assault, or, not just sexual assault, but I
Violence,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, like, I don't want to give it away, but yeah, I mean, there's some sexual violence, and it just feels like, the idea and the breakdown of this book really mirrors, I think, like if you ever read like Lord of the Flies, or even like I just saw an article the other day that was saying like they set up this like utopia for mice, gave them as much food and as much water, like gave no stresses, and it didn't matter. Like the little microcosm of their experiment, it all broke down and it turned into these like mice that stopped breeding because
Mm,
they just wanted to be groomed, and they were like the beautiful ones.
that's
It
wild.
is. I feel like this book really shows how
Yeah.
when you're left alone
Uh-huh.
and you're fighting for these things, what animal instincts come out, and
Mhm.
what behaviors and betrayals and survival instincts. And there's this part that, there was lots of scary parts, but the part for me that scared me the most, I don't know why, but it gave me like the goosebumps, where they said we were traveling as like this caravan, the 90 families, and we have dwindled down to like 20. And it's just so quiet. And I'm just like, you're out in the middle of nowhere. You don't know where you're going, what you're doing. It's like that safety of everything you've known, and you have all these people. And now it's so limited. Like, just, it
Yeah.
bothered me in a great way.
So, I do try to draw on, I'm not a psychologist, but in my line of work, especially when,
Unprofessionally a psychologist, because yes, you did. You did. Sure. Yeah. Non-licensed, right?
the in intelligence, you do have to learn some behavioral analysis
Sure.
because you're often trying to figure out people's motives when you meet them and you're talking to them, that sort of thing. And so it's just such a big part of how you have to go through your day. I mean, I won't get into it here, but if you ever want to talk about the mentality of people in the intelligence business, I'll be happy
Oh
to talk to you
boy.
about
Yes.
Love that.
As someone who's a sociology major and loves pattern people behaviors, of course I want to hear it.
it. Okay. But so you just get that, right? And I'm old and I've been doing this for a long time. So I think it's just sort of trained me to look at a situation, look at, that people are in, and then try to imagine what the outcomes would be,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody's different and they're going to react differently.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have, the sociopaths, and you're going to have the people who get
Mm-hmm.
taken advantage of and all that sort of stuff. That's the fun part of doing historical fiction, because for the first two, for The Hunger and for The Deep, they both drew very much on real history, real facts, real people. Like for The Deep, which is a reimagining of the sinking of the Titanic. Now I'm starting to get the numbers messed up in my head, but I think there were like 2,300 or 2,700 people on board the Titanic, both passengers and crew. And there's a site where they have thumbnails on everybody.
Oh, wow.
And I went through every single
Oh
thumbnail
my God.
because I was looking for which characters should have a role in the story that I was trying to tell.
Oh
Amazing.
my
And the other thing
God.
I should make clear is that historical fiction, at least the way I write it, it's fiction. It's not just a fictionalized documentary of what actually happened. There's like a point to the story, the point to the story I want to tell. And so the characters and to a certain degree, the events might not exactly track with history because, I'm not just doing a History Channel documentary. But, if it's a live person or it would change the outcome of the event, I won't go there because that would be alternate fiction, and I don't want to be too disrespectful of people who died.
Mhm.
So those are reasons why by the time I got to The Fervor, I had really changed my model. And while it is based on history, most of the characters in that book, for instance, are completely fictional. And so I didn't feel as conflicted about the situations I put them in.
Mm.
The history is pretty much the same, but things like millions of spiders falling from the sky, hopefully you as an person would know. Maybe you want to question that. Maybe that
Yeah.
wasn't taken from history.
Wait,
Yeah,
I
I
thought I
mean,
saw that somewhere.
We've had a day of cloudy with a chance of meatball. No. So one of the things that's super popular, and Adam's a fifth grade teacher and we have a younger daughter, they these kids seem to be obsessed with the I Survived series. And I feel like your books are like the adult version of I Survived, with these things that we're fascinated about. So Donner Party, Titanic with the Deep, the, Japanese internment camps with the fervor. And it's like, it just, I mean, if you ever thought history was boring and then you want to have the supernatural element, and by supernatural, I mean just like, eerie, creepy, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying like exorcism type stuff here, but I think you're a very, like, when you said that horror is expanding, its genre of what all it is, it's like, I feel like you're a great, like, almost like biographer, but like it's fictionalized, but then it's literary fiction, but then there's thriller and suspense and then horror. Like, you just touch on so many areas that I think you're a very palatable for a lot of people that are maybe would ordinarily say, I can't read horror. And I could see a lot of these kids that love I Survived of moving up
Graduating.
into,
Yeah.
of like, I'm obsessed
So
because people loved reading about like the Titanic, like we're
her books would
drawn to
be like
these
most of
things.
us didn't survive instead of I survived.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And before I forget, I got to tell you, I like to listen to the podcast at night before I fall asleep, the stuff you should know.
Uh-huh.
And they were just doing the plane flight, the like something that like disappeared like into the Indian
Yeah.
Ocean. And they were talking about how these plane flights, like certain ones that have like gone and crashed and sit at the bottom of the ocean, are basically like the pressure down there has kept them perfectly intact.
Mhm.
And that when they try to pull them to the surface, like they start to disintegrate. So there's just like a whole plane full of people just sitting down there. And I was like, you could do this. Like, I knew I was talking to you. I'm like, that's your next book.
I'll tell you, when The Hunger became very popular, it amazes me sometimes when horror people tell me they haven't heard of it, because it's sold over 100,000 copies in the U.S. and it was translated into 17 languages and won a bunch of awards and all that kind of stuff. And so when it had its success, the expectation from the publishing houses, what disaster are you going to do next?
Right.
We like, but it has to hit this sweet spot
Yeah.
of well-known enough, but has enough mysteries that you can reveal. I hate to say it, but a body count really helps. Like, a lot of people said the Hindenburg, and the Hindenburg, really not that many people died. It did have a big impact on aviation policy. It led to the.
So it's not that you want to be like gruesome about it, but there's so much that isn't known. Like, you don't know why and how. And I think you could have a lot of fun with that.
Well, side note on the Hindenburg, strangely, where I grew up in, if you know Washington, D.C., I don't know if you've ever heard of Oak Hill Cemetery. Okay, so I grew up at Evermay. My dad was the caretaker there, which is right next door to Oak Hill Cemetery. And the owner of Evermay was on the Hindenburg when he was in college and jumped off, and they had the newspapers and everything in the house, growing up, which was always like interesting to see. It was like Yale man jumps off Hindenburg, and it was him, and I'm just like, well, okay. So that
Harry?
was no, his
and they're related to the DuPonts.
Yes, they married in one of the DuPonts married into their family. So, so that was but you're right. It's much more of a visual than probably a good literary story.
Might make a good short story, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Since with Fiend, I'm doing contemporary, and the question has come up whether or not I'll go back to writing some historicals. And it's hard to say because, the publisher has a lot of pull in any kind of decision like that. But I would hope to. I mean, there's certainly plenty of authors that do both, maybe not necessarily in horror.
Yeah.
In other areas. And we'll just have to see. Writing Fiend was very freeing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, the historicals take a lot of research, and I don't mind research. That's basically what an intelligence analyst does, is they're a researcher.
Well, the good news is history often repeats itself. And I know when Adam was reading The Fervor, he was like, this is such bullshit.
Unfortunately, The Fervor hits a lot differently in 2025.
Yes.
Even when it initially came out, I'm just like, I think both of these books, were all, and I have not read Fiend yet, but I'm guessing I'm going to feel similarly based on what I know of it. And I'm good friends with George, and he's told me all about it, and his feelings. They're the kind of books that you got to stop and say, this is fiction. This did not happen. I'm very angry right now at actions that are happening, and I'm like, that just means that it is excellent writing. I don't have to have my blood pressure this high, but especially in the fervor, there are some moments, where I'm just like so angry. You make, these situations are so realistic. This is, can't believe it's 80 years ago now, but like the
Yeah,
way yeah,
it's crazy how relevant it is. I
my
actually have been
God.
asked to talk to, like, book clubs and stuff like that lately for The Fervor
Uh-huh.
because it's swinging back into the public
Oh, and
consciousness.
just the way, yeah, just the dehumanization and all of these
The
things and the sort of
narking,
like,
tattletaling.
well, sort of the what makes a real American and all these
Mm.
kinds of things. It's just like, shut up. And you do that so well in it. But one thing that really fascinates me about these two is that, I don't want to spoil, I know they've been out, but I don't want to spoil it completely. But this idea that things that seem supernatural might have an answer that are scientific, right? Like, was that you? Like, was that something that interests you, that idea? Because in both of these two books, The Hunger and Fervor especially, that kind of resonates in both.
Well, it's probably because, like when I was younger, I was fascinated with the supernatural.
Mm,
And, that's the time of life when we are, right? When we're kids, because we don't know the answers to a
Yeah.
lot of things. And especially when you're young, that seems to be the time when your family wants to introduce religion to you. And there's always this sort of mystical,
Yeah.
unexplainable part in religions. And so we're probably more open to that than any other time in their life. Well, by the time I started writing novels, I was kind of a scientist by then. And so
yeah,
I I realized as I started writing horror, and I'm kind of using air quotes there,
right.
that it was hard for me to do because I don't easily believe in the unexplainable and that sort of thing.
Mm,
So I feel like I still tend to walk that line in my writing because, my mind's kind of not there. Fiend was a little different.
mm.
Most of the book, it's not clear what's going on. They raise the issue of, could this possibly be attributed to something supernatural?
Hmm.
Or is that just a smokescreen they're throwing up to throw people off the fact that they're doing horrible things?
Right.
And, I tried to keep that until at the last minute, I kind of explain really what's going on.
No, okay.
And I don't want to give anything
Yeah.
Yeah,
away,
yeah.
but
No.
yeah, it was fun to do it.
Yeah,
Well,
so
And
I
you'll
wanted
see.
to touch on how you said it was liberating. Like, so why was that experience, from what you were doing to this one, just because it felt like you were trying on a whole new style and just feeling things out? You didn't feel like you had to play with the same rules or parameters, less
Well,
research.
for one thing, I wasn't constrained by history.
hmm,
Okay.
Like, if you go out and say, like, the horror element is kind of kept as a surprise. There's originally the way it was drafted the first time, it was definitely more of a Wendigo. I know
oh,
I
okay.
always pronounce that wrong. Wendigo
Yes.
leaned more heavily on indigenous cultures.
Mm,
But during that time, there was a lot of debate about appropriation, and
right.
we did use a sensitivity reader, but the publisher, was wondering if maybe we could temper this a little bit.
Hmm.
So I introduced the idea that every culture really has shapeshifters.
Right.
We start with werewolves, we talk about indigenous ones, we talk about the French werewolves,
Hmm.
just to open up the idea that there's some kind of shape shifting
Which werewolves?
Sort of
going
like a
on.
universal idea of this
Yeah.
type of thing. Yeah.
So, that way we could investigate that there might be an unexplainable reason behind these things, but we also introduce, well, these are possible explanations,
Right.
and leave it up to the reader to decide really what's going on. I think in Fiend, it's not left up to the reader to decide at the end.
Well,
And
yeah.
again, I didn't have any history that I had to honor. So,
Yeah.
That is
yeah.
is fun.
It's funny, before like segueing into talking about Fiend specifically, I think the idea that the answer might be scientific, or, like you said, these spiders are this kind of thing, to me, it almost makes it, like, as a reader, scarier. Because, like, a shapeshifter, like, I'm like, oh, that's creepy, but I really don't think I'm gonna, come across that. Now, if it's a disease or something that I could be infected by,
Mhm.
scares the shit out of me. So it's like, I definitely, like, I love the fact that you bring those questions and things in, because it's like, what starts as something that you're like, oh, this is a fun or, scary, spooky thing. It's like suddenly becomes, wait, could this happen? And I love
Well,
that.
yeah, that's a big part of it too. For a period of my career as an analyst, one
Hmm.
of the topics that were in my purview were genocides and mass atrocities.
Yeah.
So this
Mm,
was during the 90s when they were all over the place. Like I
they
worked on the
were.
Balkans crisis for 2.5 years, Sierra Leone, Rwanda,
I was
Tanzania.
gonna say
I
the
mean,
Hutus and the Tutsis. And
yeah. So, you know, when you go through that, you really see just how horrible people are to each other,
Yeah.
like the depths of what people are capable
mm,
of. I mean, we had one person on the team who did torture reports, you know,
Yeah.
things like that. And you realize, and that's when it's becomes harder to really be, fearful of tropes,
mm,
like ghosts. Or I think
mhm.
I lost a lot of that fear then because I knew that it was people that
Yeah.
you really need to
Yes.
be afraid of. And their minds can turn in an instant. And most people are capable of doing things that, if you asked them, of course, they would say no, but we saw it with our own eyes.
Yes.
So it made it harder to write horror for Way, but I do carry that sentiment, I think, into a lot of my writing. And that's why, again, walking that line between is it supernatural or is it just this person doing this thing, why it's scary, because I do make it possible in my stories for it to be just the person.
Yeah.
You have this one character, just what you're saying, like in The Hunger, where you say something like, well, he was always like not crazy, but just like unpredictable. And because he's always unpredictable, like that always was really safe. And like you could count on that. And I had another recording where we were talking about like the character that Johnny Depp plays, where he's
In
talking about
Pirates
like,
of the Caribbean. Yeah.
yeah, where he's saying like it's, you can always trust a dishonest man to be dishonest. And I felt like it was just funny, or not funny, but like interesting how, almost like when in these genocides or certain things, like there's these patterns of, you can count that there's going to be othering. You can count that there's like these critical markers of
Mhm.
what are going to be hallmarks of these bad people that
Yeah.
that they're going to lean into, like that are constants. But then I'm sure there's a lot of, for each one of the things that you worked on, like a lot of variables of just how bad does it get and just how do they execute, like God, that's a terrible word. I am so sorry. I meant like,
Go forward with whatever.
yeah,
Thing.
geez
Yeah.
Louise,
Oh,
I'm
we
so
use
sorry.
execute
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Execute this maneuver. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was Freudian, I guess, but no, I mean, I come from the perspective of, when I was 13, we were touring all over Germany, and my mom was like, we're going to go to a concentration camp. But I mean, at that point, I hadn't taken any history classes, I hadn't been introduced to it at all. And I was like, just listening to what the words were, just thinking like, well, this sounds kind of boring. That's what we're doing today. Like, okay. And, I never forget what it was like walking around there, and the statues of saying like never forget, and the thing. So I feel like the things that I learned that were just like normalized and became okay. And then I eventually read Elie Wiesel's Night, and even more so of just like the human nature and the things that came out. So I feel like what you focus on and what your career was of, you're not just touring a concentration camp, or you're not reading a book. I mean, this was your job of looking at some of the worst aspects of terror in human life, and just it being pushed off as, this is okay, this is normal, just ingratiating
Yeah. I
people
mean,
into it.
I do think for most people, when they're taught these things or they learn about these incidents in history, there is still a remove.
Mm.
Now, I have never been to the Jewish concentration camps, so I can't speak to what it's like to physically be there. I've been in other situations, and that's horrible enough. But when you have to really turn it over in your mind and analyze what's going on and compare it to other cases and measure and all this stuff, it does become very real to you. And yeah, so in a way, in the stories, I'm trying to give readers a little bit of that experience to wake them up. Like
Yeah.
in the first, everybody or most people, I guess they don't really teach it in school anymore, but everybody knows the little sound bite about the internment camps, oh, Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor And,
Mhm.
the United States decided they had to put the Japanese in the internment into camps
Yeah.
for their own protection of the United States.
Mhm.
And they just accept that as,
Yeah.
oh, that's it. But if you actually study it, you find out that, well, first of all, FDR's office had conducted several studies, and all of them came to the same conclusion that there was no threat by the
Sure.
Japanese living on the West Coast. So they knew that, but there was a lot of, it was politicized, and
Sure.
there was a lot of public outcry that they didn't feel safe, blah, blah, blah. But what was behind that was decades of racism
Right.
Sure.
on the West Coast, and these paramilitary groups who sent around night letters and other, had town halls where they were accusing the Japanese of being more loyal to Japan, decades. So that people just believed that
Mhm.
Asians were sneaky, Asians couldn't be trusted, Asians would sell you out, all the things
Right.
that racists say about all
Dirty.
minorities in order to demonize them, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I was trying to make people stop and think, like, question the little sound bite that you're trained in class when you're a kid, which I understand why teachers have to do that. You're pummeling kids with ideas left and right, and you just need to give them this digestible pill, right? So they carry away something about it. You can't give them the whole experience, but it really does a disservice to
Mhm.
our critical thinking skills
Right.
later in life.
There's a book out, Adam. I know that you've read it. I haven't read it yet, but the lies my teacher told me,
Yeah.
and it's like really kind of breaking down a lot of these concepts that we were told. That really.
And unfortunately, it's getting a lot even, as bad as it has been previously, got a little bit better. And now it's getting bad again in the sense of what's being taught as history and what's being left out. And, when you talk about some of the things that you're looking for when you see these things starting to happen, we're kind of slow motion watching them all happen again in our country, which is just,
Well,
terrifying in a way. Really, like, I can only imagine as someone that knows all those signs and studied them for as long as you have, that looking around every day is pretty like exasperating and terrifying for you.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it was during the first administration. Now
Hmm.
I am just sort of inured to it.
Yeah.
I know that's a bad way to be, but right, there's something that we call the autocrat's playbook that
Right.
we used to watch for each of these, watch the steps unfolding. And,
Hmm.
he's been following that. So
Yeah.
what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I
And
saw that.
so,
I saw this morning that Wall Street Journal reported that Smithsonian is now being looked at as how it's going to curate to this administration's
Right.
take of history of
oh,
what items will and won't be
oh
shown.
God,
And
there's whole museums that'll be gone.
well, and that's
Yeah.
why they're saying, and like when people are like, buy the books, buy
Yeah.
the real books, have them, hold them, because I mean, there's so many books out there in like historical fiction and people being like the bookkeepers and the library savers and all that stuff. But it's like we're here again. Like it's not a concept. And now when you're thinking like even institutions like Smithsonian, it's like, what do you mean it's being curated to
Yeah.
tell? Like that's
Things that
Right.
were like untouchable,
yes.
and
Right. We're in a whole new era in America. We've never been in this place before.
and
And, I don't know what it's going to take for some people to realize that.
yeah.
But yeah, it
Well,
just,
it just feels like it's this, like you touched on it of saying like, well, we're doing this for their own protection. And it's like, it's almost, I don't want to say it's euphemistic language, but it's certainly like pumped through the political machine and like turned out so that like, how can you really have outrage about this? Cause
Well,
it's for their own
it's
protection, right?
propaganda,
well,
right?
That's
Yeah.
what
but
I
it's
mean. It's propaganda.
propaganda.
And that's the same thing here. It's like, well, here's some things I've heard, for like right wing sound bites of just like within my own area. It's like, well, I don't really like that Pope. It's like this Pope was really radicalized. It's like, okay, what? It's
Because
like
he was
I
kind
thought
and
he was
wanted to,
like, yeah,
yeah.
it's like, wait a minute. So like you've been Catholic your whole life, you believe in all these things, but now when like the manifestation of God is on earth now because he goes against what your president's saying, like now you're like, well, I don't I think, the
That's an
Catholic
interesting, yeah, that's an interesting example you give.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I mean, I did all that stuff. I stopped being a traditional, working in traditional intelligence targets. Um, about 2/3 through my career. So the last third of my career, I was in technology. Actually, I was
Mm,
asked to lead a research effort against an emerging technology, which just happened to be social media. So I was one of the
Wow.
first researchers, yeah, in the IC to do this. And I had been involved in another disruptive technology like 20 years earlier, had that experience. So was asked to sort of apply that to social media. So we took very technical scientific approach to it, right? And so I've spent a lot of time looking at disinformation in the social media space, hired a lot of the top researchers in the world. They worked for me. They went on to start their own companies. So I know a lot about it. And propaganda, I mean, even though when you tell people today, you know that most of what you're seeing in social media is propaganda. It's a lie, or it's at least not the truth. People say, yeah, yeah, I know that, but they still absorb it.
Mm,
It still has an effect on them. That's the biggest scary thing to me right now, that we really dropped the ball not regulating the social media companies from the get-go. And that has been debated a lot. People were not maybe aware of that. We came really close to getting something done, after the yeah 2016 election. But
Oh yeah, with the Cambridge Analytica, like that situation.
yeah,
Yeah.
that
Okay.
was the iceberg. But now it's the tech companies, and we're seeing that with the Gen AI companies as well. They've effectively either donated so much to politicians to get them to keep off their backs, or they ridicule their lack of technical knowledge to
Hmm.
keep
mm,
their backs. But it's really put America, well, the world actually, in a very bad place in terms of letting these companies that are solely driven by a profit motive to have so much control over what they do that impacts our lives. Sure, everybody could just up and quit social media, but social media has become the way we communicate with
right.
each other these days. It can't just go away easily.
Right. And I had read this article in Rolling Stone many years ago, maybe like 2010, something like that. And it was when like John McCain and stuff like were, running around that time.
So like 2008-ish.
Yeah. And it was saying like within that same article or that same issue, it was talking about, the difference between like white hat and black hat, like
Hackers?
yes. And it was basically saying that like, it's really hard to catch and do the things that need to be done because the ones that work for the government are basically, for lack of a better word, like C-type capability students, whereas the ones that are in private life are like your A plus, like the most skilled. And I was just curious as your thoughts to that, Alma, like with the social media of like those that are trying to legislate and protect, are they, I don't necessarily want to say C, but just like they're not in the industry, they're not watching, like, they don't see how much is happening. Um, because I just feel like there's this,
Well,
like I hear people say like, well, I'm not going to give this over because I want my data. I don't want my data out there. I'm like, do you have any idea? Like I specialize like in marketing, like with data, and like your car emits data for everything you're doing. And like with pretty damn good certainty, I could tell you exactly your full profile. Like, in fact, I read an article the other day that like your Wi-Fi can identify like who you are, just like through Wi-Fi. Like you walk in the room and like, yeah, it's this user.
yeah. So first of all, on the data thing, because having worked for NSA for 25 years, believe me, I know a lot about data mining, where it comes from, who
Mm-hmm.
gets it, what's in there, unique identifiers, all that stuff. That ship sailed for American consumers a long time ago.
Hmm.
We completely
Missed it.
abdicated,
Hmm.
right? Because people said, oh, well, the trade-off for me is we get these nifty frictionless transactions
Right.
because from tech companies, and I'm okay with that. And I don't think they really thought through what they were giving up, but too late for that.
Yeah.
Never going to get it back.
It's like you're the product and you're being, you know, you're giving it all
Absolutely.
away. Yeah. Even like your bonus like shopper card at the grocery store that started early then, where it's like your
That
habits
was
and
one of the
behaviors.
first, yeah,
Yep. And like the
things
ones where they're
people
like,
think of.
take a picture of your receipt so you can earn some points. It's like you're giving a lot away here. But anyway, yes,
Yeah.
please go on.
Well, just to let you know, I mean, one of the little factoids that I throw out when I do talks on this is, can you guess how many data points Facebook has on you? And you don't even have to have an account on Facebook.
Oh God.
Okay, first of all, I didn't know that you didn't even have to have the account.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess like
Well,
three, like 300 data points. You
Adam,
talking like
do you want to?
categories, or are you talking like
No, I'm talking about individual pieces of data.
hundreds of thousands? Then I
I
think.
don't.
Well, 52,000. They
52,000.
collect about 52,000 data points on every person. And
Ooh,
this is how it happened. When it started and we tracked this, they started with like, I can't remember if it was 58, 75, something like that. It was under 100, and then it bumped up. But what happened was early on in the, data is the new oil, and
that's what
he
I've
who
been
has the
calling it.
most.
Like it's the new black gold, really.
Right, right. Well, that was back in the late 20 knots in the early 2010s. But back then, it pretty much stayed in a silo, right? Google knew what you did through Google. Amazon knew what you did through Amazon platform. Facebook knew what you did. And data collectors like Axiom and some of the other
Yep.
ones were, rolling up third-party data collection and that sort of thing.
I'm like,
But at a
as an
certain
aside, I'm
point,
like laughing because that is like my marketing pitch. Like Google knows what you bought, Amazon knows
oh,
what you shop for.
absolutely.
Like you're kind of saying it verbatim, and it's like we're not,
You're selling it as a good thing.
I
No,
know. Like,
no,
oh my
well,
God, she probably is
it
like,
depends on what your aims are, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
So, but at a certain point, everyone realized that more data was better. So everyone started buying and selling to each other.
Mm.
So nowadays, no, they don't really have unique data sets on you. And a lot of the data is contradictory. And that's why they need so much data, because one data set might have said you're 48 and another one says you're 24 and another one says you're 64. So they take the average number of all the one, you know what I mean? Like
yes,
that's how data works. Anyway, so to get back to the original question where you asked, are the people who work for the government agencies like C students and the ones who go to private industry or A
yes,
students? That's a very complicated answer. Okay.
okay,
So and someone who recruited people too to come work for us who were in just the best tech programs in the country. They do and they don't. And the other thing is, for instance, at NSA, sure, we got kids that didn't come from the best schools, but the work is so intensive that oftentimes they become so skilled that
Mhm.
they end up being headhunted and poached
That's
away.
what I had read.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I read. Like if you even become that good,
It's like you trained them up and
yeah,
then
you're
they
culled
get.
out of the and
Yeah.
it's like come work for us. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's kind of both ways. Now, one thing I'll say on artificial intelligence is that quite a few years back, the big tech companies started hiring out all the grad students and the professors. And there's sort of a gulf of a lack of, especially professors, actually good
Wow.
qualified professors teaching in artificial intelligence programs around the country. Anyway, so we've become a tech podcast now. The book that I'm working on now, the book that's going to come after Fiend, is actually kind of like techno horror.
Oh.
I can't go into it too much, but it is about social media, and it is about like deep fakes, two subjects that I
I'm
used to
excited
know
for
a lot.
that. That sounds amazing. I think ultimately there's so much unknown right now, and how like they're saying like can your chat GPT conversations, can they be subpoenaed? Is this
Yeah.
something that we can look at? Yeah. I mean, there's so much of just this new frontier, and I'm just giddy delighted you talking about how you're like, oh well, that was like 20 years ago where it was the black gold, and I'm like, you say that, and I believe you wholeheartedly, but let me tell you how difficult it is to even talk to people that, are business owners and they're responsible for grant money, public
Yeah, no, you're
social.
absolutely right. You're absolutely
They
right.
just don't get it. And
And that,
it is
yeah.
like giving a teaching course
Mm.
every single time. And I thoroughly enjoy it. And I'm not
Well,
even
yeah,
scraping like the top of it here, but and it's like sometimes it's like, well, no, we're just going to stick with doing this. And I'm like, you don't even understand how valuable this data is
But
and
I
the
think that not.
proprietary. Yep.
Yeah.
And
Then
I called it creepy cool, where it's like, it's very creepy to the consumer, but it's very cool to the person who gets to monetize it.
well, I sympathize with you, and God bless you, because it really irritates the heck out of me to deal, because knowledge is very uneven. There's some people who know, and that's great. And you can have these conversations with them. There's a lot of people who really have no knowledge, or their knowledge is very spotty, and they
Mhm.
just know enough to be really difficult to talk
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Hey, you've done this role before.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that
So I'm
also,
kind of glad I got out of the consulting business after
yeah,
doing it. When I retired, I did it for 6 years, and then about a year and a half ago, I dropped out of it, but I still will speak to writers groups about generative AI.
I'm fascinated that that's what's going to happen. And I think you're right, Adam. Like, I feel like a lot is going to be able to come out from this. And like, I've already seen like some of the news articles where it's like, if you already have grandiosity or thoughts of like, religious things like God is talking to you and this and that, like, because so much of generative AI is mirroring things back to you, that it's like, yes, you are a chosen one. Yes, you are. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I'm thinking there's a lot of fodder.
yeah. I think that's
There
funny.
will be. But part of the problem when you write tech in, the publishing industry is very slow. It takes, you can turn in a novel and minimum for traditional publishers, it's going to take 18 months for that book to get to market. But
Mm.
tech moves very
Oh,
fast.
sure. That's
For
a great
instance,
point.
yeah, when I was running emerging technologies programs and writing for them, we never would put something out in hard copy. It would be disseminated digitally
Yeah.
as best we can. So I'm a little worried that by the time the book
Yeah.
makes it through the process and comes out, that it's going to be a little overtaken by events. But then, just like you said, there's this part of
I was going to
the
say,
population that it's going to be, wow, this is genius.
I there's always those, pioneers, early adopters, and there will be some people that's like probably like, yeah, that's we're on to the next thing. But I think for the majority, like when you look at that bell curve of how quickly people adapt to technology, you're probably right on pace, honestly.
Yeah. I think that's unfortunately why the ship has sailed on our information being, taken in mind also because so many people it took so long for them to even understand the beginnings of what was happening before we were already at the 52,000 data points that, Facebook and them were taking.
Yeah.
I think that, to bring that into Fiend, I think it's really interesting because it's almost like so Fiend is talking about really sort of sounds like a messed up family that is holding on to its power. The power stays within. Um, and bad things happen to people that come up against this family. And, again, when you look at
She's giggling like
yeah,
you
yeah,
have no idea. You're gonna learn
Well,
I can't
today.
wait.
funny
Again,
thing
it's
is,
like, yeah.
I had a certain model in my head when I wrote the book, and then after it was out, my agent, my literary agent, kept making all these comparisons to Trump
Yeah.
and the Trump family, and I didn't really think about the Trump family when I did it, but I guess there are some
That's what I was
parallels
It's
to
like.
it.
subconsciously oozed out.
I know he is president and all this stuff's happening right now, but his family's not nearly as good at it as it sounds like the family in your book is. um,
Right,
but
they're really practiced in the book.
yeah, but this idea that, and it, touches on in many ways racism because it is this family and it's like this bloodline and all of these kinds of things and keeping it, pure and keeping everything within that. But then also this idea that sort of morality doesn't mean as much as making sure you hold on to the power and the right people are holding on to the power no matter what. And I think that that just resonates in this time. And I can imagine, I don't know exactly if it was 18 months or what have you between when you kind of turned it in and it's out, but like obviously the election had not happened, the inauguration, it's like
Right.
all of these things, are you writing this thinking, I really hope that this is looking back on a bad period and not in the middle of it, but yet here we are.
Well, really, the big idea to me, I was just horrified at how people were just starting to worship wealth,
Mm,
right? Like wealth again is the only thing that matters.
yeah,
And rich people are the only ones worth paying attention to. And I don't care how they got wealthy. I don't care if they're lying to you. I don't care if they're cheating pensioners. I don't care if they're throwing Social Security beneficiaries out on the street.
And there's even like
Now
this
they're
like clout for like good for you that you're not paying any taxes and
yeah,
like good for you that you
right.
skirt it. It just there's
you're
like a
smarter than
dirtiness
yeah,
that is just celebrated.
Right. And I hate that.
yeah,
So I thought I'd write this story to show that the wealthy are not virtuous. For the most part, the wealthy got that way, by cheating, swindling, and
Oh
running
yeah.
roughshod over the decent people.
yeah,
Oh
And so
God.
that was sort of the idea. And unfortunately, that I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon.
Nope. Nope.
yeah. No.
Isn't it funny too? Like I start thinking about like when I had taken like a world history class in college that they talk about like the new Russians, I guess is like the name with like with the new money and just how like old money looks down on new money and it's like even within there's like like the power struggles of well, and
Yeah, well, my last spy novel was about that. Red
I didn't
London
read
was
that. That's awesome.
about Russian oligarchs, and
I mean,
back when the Soviet Union was disintegrating, which was in the mid 80s or
mhm.
so, I was a younger analyst and was watching when what was going on in the old Soviet Union was literally the Wild West. People, because they were trying to privatize everything that was state owned. So
Mm,
people were just shooting it out. They were killing I mean, it was a mess.
Wow.
There was no government. AIDS was skyrocketing. Drug use was skyrocketing. Just no control. Anyway, and at that time, England, which was going through a terrible recession, just waved their golden visa and said, literally in the direction of Russia, if you invest X amount of money, we will give you a visa. You can live in our country. And they got
mm.
all these oligarchs, and it took 20 years, but the chickens came home to roost. Now they have these very rich thugs who are beholden to Putin, dug into their society,
Oh.
dug into their economy, So if you're interested, go read my other book, Red
Oh,
London.
I look,
Yeah.
there's probably nothing that you have, like, I plan on being like a full Alma student because there's nothing that I've read of yours that I don't like. Like, it just fits what
Oh,
I'm
thank
looking
you.
for. No, it really does because it's this blend of like great story, but I mean, you're so well researched and knowledgeable, but everything's engaging and like, um, there's times like I'm the type of reader that I will suffer through a book, and a lot of my friends are just like, just DNF it, and I won't do that. I find when I read your books, I'm enjoying what reading is supposed to be, or I'm just
Oh,
enjoying sitting and like I'm reading my book, and that feels so good. So I'm excited for all those things, and I really see why you're going to get these adaptations. You know what I mean? And
we've been very lucky
they're very
since.
deserved though. I mean, I want to let you know in this exact moment, I'm going to put up a social post of my tortoiseshell cat Truffle, who has literally fallen asleep to your voice and is hugging your books.
Oh,
And I was like, that's how you know this is a great episode
Yes.
because she's usually scampering around. She's like literally falling asleep to it. And no, it's just
oh,
been such a pleasure because you're so well, knowledgeable in everything. And obviously like a lot of the stuff you like to talk about, so do I, whatever. But these are the things that have been human atrocities to me that have been always fascinating and looking at how all these things happen. And I just feel like at the beginning when we started this podcast, Adam, so many people said
Yeah.
like, oh, well, who would you introduce as a person to like that's new to horror, and they would say Rachel
Or someone that
Harrison
says they don't
and
like
cackle,
horror.
right?
Yeah.
Read Alma
yeah.
Katsu.
Absolutely.
Like my girlfriend group, a reading group, they're gonna just like, if you've read The Nightingale, if you've read The Women, read Alma's books
Oh, yeah.
because like they are the next level. They're so well researched. They're so good. It's not that you're going to be like grossed out and creeped out to a level of like what you might think stereotypical horror is, but you will enjoy because there will be moments. I mean, you have a scene in there of just I think will haunt me for a little bit, but it's again, it's human behavior, and I don't see why anyone wouldn't read your books. They're just
Oh, well,
they're
thank you
perfect.
very
They're
much.
they're perfectly done, and I'm so glad that we got to meet. And I'm excited for Fiend. I did try on the tattoo that you were passing out. I
Yes.
forgot to take the picture for
Oh, I
you.
have another one.
Oh,
Don't
good. We'll
worry.
do it again.
Yeah, we'll do one just in time when
Yes,
the
yes.
groundbreaking
So
releases.
Excellent.
yeah, I wish you like all the best with it, but I really feel like you're out
Thank
here doing the good work. And for anyone that wants to almost like get deconstructed in the best possible way that you get to have a fun time, enjoy. It's a little spooked out, but like feel like I'm doing something good with my reading. Like, yeah, this is you. You own this
oh,
space.
Yeah.
thank you.
So where do we
That's so
find you
kind.
on the evil social media?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm just under my name
Yeah.
on Instagram is probably the most, but I'm on Blue Sky also. I stepped away from Twitter, of course, and I'm
Yeah.
on Facebook, but barely.
Yeah.
and I'm gonna try to do a few more videos, so maybe I'll resurface again on TikTok,
Well,
but who knows?
fantastic. You have
I have a newsletter on Substack. That's probably the
yes, I love
easiest
your
way to.
your newsletter, and I was
Oh,
just
thank you.
reading again the scams that are being sent to writers. Like, holy crap! I never knew.
Wait,
Like,
what are they? I don't know
they
about
are so like they're clearly AI generated, and like they must put your books into this thing, and it like will pretend like it's people that have read your books and love your books, and they're trying to get money from you and things. It's just so many different,
gross.
among
It's
other
insane.
things.
It's like the new Nigerian prince.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah,
to
man.
writers. All right.
The worst one, I should say this in case other writers are listening,
yeah.
and I'm sure they are. Really, the like most prevalent one, which I didn't write about in the article, is writers get contacted by people who say they're running podcasts,
No.
and it's like
Oh,
executive producer of the podcast, and they ask them to turn over their Facebook page to
oh
them so
hell
that they can.
no.
And I know, but several smart, famous writers have done this
Oh, I
and
believe
lost
you.
control.
Being in this space, it happens because there's a lot of trust.
Yeah. So people should be aware of that. If somebody does that to you, do not turn over you give your Facebook password because it's
Oh my.
really hard to get Facebook to kick them off and
Yeah.
give it back to
My
you.
God.
Wow.
And well, the reason I'm like, when I say, oh, hell no, that strongly is like, there's so many marketing people I've dealt with are like, I don't know who runs my Facebook. I don't have the password for it. I gave it away. Like someone else set it up. I don't even remember who it was now. And it just was like a thing when people were first like getting one. And now they're like, well, I can't change it now, because I've had it like
Mm.
this for this long and I still don't. So it's like, okay, you know,
Any writers, any readers, yes, your Substack is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and you have a story that will be out
well, yes.
in the Stand anthology, which is very exciting. Again, Fiend, September 16th. You have anything else that you have coming up that you can tell us about?
Probably not.
Okay, perfect.
What's going on
I
though?
like
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
It sounds like there is stuff coming, but you can't talk about it, which is exciting.
All kinds
Um,
of
yes,
yeah.
yeah. So thank you again. This was fascinating and awesome as I kind of expected it would be. But thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
This was so much fun.
Yeah.
Thank
See you.
you. Bye.
Bye.